Morning, everyone. Well,
Michael's the manager of the Tree Seed Center, which we're very happy to welcome you today. We'd like to also respectfully acknowledge the ancestral, traditional, and unceded territories upon which we're meeting today. Welcome to Challenges to Our Future Tree Seed Supply. And I'll talk about what some of these challenges are, but I'd like to first introduce our production team for the meeting. Myself, I'm the Cone and Seed Improvement Officer at the Tree Seed Center here. I've been here for 30 years. Don Pigott, I think everybody knows Don Pigott right here. He owns Yellow Point Propagation on Vancouver Island. Been in business for 48 years. 38, I'm sorry. Melissa Spearing, seed biologist with the National Tree Seed Center out of Fredericton, and Victoria Lee, testing supervisor at the Tree Seed Center. So we're bringing together a wide variety of groups over almost the past week. Some of us have been at it since last Wednesday, so we seem a little burnt or tired. So we do have the International Seed Federation. They had their annual general meeting in association with this week. Our Tree Seed Working Group, Melissa and I, our ISTA, International Seed Testing Association, our Forest and Shrub Committee, and our UFRO group, Seed Physiology and Technology. What do all these groups have in common? Really one main goal. It's the sustained availability of high quality and adapted seed. And so that's what we want to continue to keep in mind. That's our goal. And do we have some challenge to realize that into the future? I'd like to recognize we've had several sponsors throughout the tour through various in-kind contributions, but it always helps when we get cold hard cash donated to us. So I'd like to thank Select Seed and Bernard Seed Orchard Company, especially for their contributions very early in the process. Some of you may be from very different jurisdictions, deal with very different species. You know, our meeting this week has been very much Pacific Northwest conifer focused. And that's really the majority of our business in British Columbia. We will be expanding our use of broadleaves in the future, and I'm likely looking to some of you to help with that process. But we probably have something to share with respect to conifers. So what are our challenges? Some of you who are on Thursday, I've got a few repeat slides, but I'll keep those to a minimum. Really, we've had a lot of facility closures. I guess the thing that was the big impetus for us and Tree Seed Working Group was the closure of the provincial facility in Ontario, a fairly large forestry dependent province. And locally in British Columbia, we used to have 6 processing facilities, and it's really Don's facility and our facility that's left currently processing cones and seeds. We've had a lot of rapid succession, so loss of a lot of practical wisdom, expertise, and field knowledge. And it's not everybody's experience, but hard to maybe get people into this field, which it doesn't really make sense. We're always a good news stories. We're regenerating the forest. There's a lot of demand and sort of the climate benefits for reforestation. So, you know, it's one of the goals to try to raise the awareness of those opportunities. I do think what we do here is generally unknown until somebody comes and visits our site, whether it's a minister or an executive or someone else. So there's really a lack of understanding what we play in it. People just think seeds magically appear, and where do they come from? And really operating behind the scenes, seed services are only noticed when they fail. So they get a lot of attention at that point. Otherwise, they're really underneath the radar. Personally, I think there's a lack of research and education, particularly with tree seeds, and I think these two are linked. There's a lot of emphasis on newer technologies, digging deeper, maybe not so operationally practical for those dealing at that level. So a lot of picking the latest, sexiest tools rather than the most appropriate for the problem at hand. And so I see this cycle that we have: no funding, no research, no people, no teaching, no progress, and a lack of capital investment. And a facility like this obviously requires a lot of capital investment. It's not necessary to have a facility of this size to process cones and seeds, but there's certainly a certain amount, and with today's safety requirements, it's certainly increasing. There are also big promises, so this is a challenge in terms of what we need in terms of tree seed for the future. And seed is often an afterthought. Just a little bit about BC here. In terms of our species mix, we're currently around 300 million seedlings. Roughly these days we have, we're planting a little more of interior spruce, which is a combination of white and Engelmann spruce and hybrid back crosses. But both lodgepole pine and interior spruce are around 100 million seedlings. Interior Douglas fir, we've seen a rapid increase up to over 40 million, where we go back not many years and it was down to below 20 million. So a doubling in 5 years of our interior Douglas fir. And this seems to be, at least what I'm hearing, the species that there is a lot of demand export for replacing Norway spruce in Europe, in Central Europe especially, where Norway spruce is failing. A bit about our program. Certainly we're all styro block based system in British Columbia. Bare root seedlings are long gone. I don't know, Spencer, probably 15 years at least, or something like that. And currently direct seeding is really quite negligible. Just a little bit about our organization structure at the Tree Seed Center. You met Michael, our manager, myself, Victoria is the testing supervisor, and Marilyn Cherry, she's the cone and seed operations officer. The other people on our sort of management team, we have a financial analyst and a facilities administration officer. Then we have Spencer, who takes care of inventory management, and Laura, who's in charge of cone and seed processing. This is our actually 65th year of operation as a Tree Seed Center. We've been on this site since 1986. And really our mantra, our motto is excellence in cone and seed services, and we really try to emphasize that continuous improvement mentality. Fix it if it can be improved, but don't wait until it's broken, but also know when to leave it alone. That's sort of saying I don't know if anybody else here likes it, but. A little bit about us, seed storage, it's really our prime directive. We do have a stewardship mandate, so all clients who are sending seed back to public land need to store their seeds here. There's no cost to that, so that's kind of the trade-off. We have over about, this is little old numbers from last fall, but over 71,000 kilograms of seed, enough for about 7.6 billion seedlings. And one of our big projects that Michael's working on is we're currently planning to replace our 35-year-old freezers that are storing those 71,000 kilograms of seed. And, you know, the estimated value is over $100 million. So that gets executives' attention. And, you know, that's just the cost on the market. If we were actually to lose that supply, you know, the spin-off cost would be much, much greater than that. Testing is also a cost recovery service, is also a stewardship service. So we do all the testing for seed lots in British Columbia. Just to contrast that with, our cone and seed processing and our seed preparation, which is stratification and pelleting. These are cost recovery services at our facility. A lot of crop variability. Just a few slides here on variables. We see at this point it wasn't so much that these crops were so huge. These were mainly the result of lodgepole pine after the mountain pine beetle and people wanting those sort of insurance collections to make sure that they had seeds for the future. Also the uncertainty of whether they could collect from dead trees, and we certainly showed that you can and get successful collections from those dead trees. Just a few things about our testing program. As you see, over 60% of what we do is germination tests, both on new seed lots and on a retesting regime. And in terms of inputs and outputs, we see, you know, in 2021, we had about almost 5,000 kilograms of seed go out, and 4,000 come in. We expect that to at least be reversed this year with a very large cone crop on the landscape. I'd like to talk about this little, how are we doing for time? Am I way behind? So in terms of our challenges to our future tree seed supply, what can we do? How can our various groups help each other and develop synergies? Can we somehow sustain the enthusiasm and effort once we all go back to our jobs? And that's something I struggle with. And how do we expand our scope beyond the have nations? You know, certainly within ISTA, within UFRO, we are looking to expand to more tropical and sort of have a global perspective, because some of the problems we deal with are global in nature. One of the things we've discussed is, you know, production, and it's just one idea, sort of a white paper trying to convince authorities, funding agencies that there is a need, there's a lack of understanding. And one of the things we've done is put up about 5 questions around the room in terms of your opinions, trying to solicit. Melissa's big on surveys and done some of that, and I hope some of you have completed them. Or
the other thing in the back of your booklet, you guys all go back to the booklet on the last page. If you'd like to just write it down, to people that with us all weekend, there's another place with the same questions. So if you'd like to give that to us before the end of the day, that would be great.
And that's all I have for this morning. I'm not so emotional that I'm, you know, crying up here. It's like I'll never put my contacts in just before I give a talk again. To introduce somebody.
Sort of the last man standing when it comes to private seed processors in British Columbia. I formerly worked for the largest forest company in Canada and second or third largest forest. I'm not sure I need that. Oh, to advance. Second or third largest forest company in the world until it was taken over by Weyerhaeuser. Anyway, when I started, I think there were 6 facilities processing seed. The picture you see there is from Percy Ruth's plant in the Shuswap from 1927. And he was the first private seed dealer in Canada. Seed's been processed, collected and processed in BC for 100 years this year. The first seed plant was actually the Dominion of Canada Department of the Interior, and it was encouraged by the British Forestry Commission to harvest seed for Europe because of the devastation of World War I and later World War II. And, you know, there was massive deforestation in that country for the war in particular. So it operated from 1922 to 1933. In the interim, a fellow named Percy Ruth, and his son is still alive and well in Victoria. He'll be 90 in a couple months. But he had the first private extractory in BC. He was also an insurance agent, and he gave out to his clients little insurance books, and he kept a set for himself, and he recorded every seed or cone transaction he had. And it's very interesting to take a look at them. I have all his diaries. So anyway, he sold it to the Manning Seed Company, which is eventually morphed into Silva Seed. In 1954. The next facility was Charles McFadden. He actually worked at the original one for the Dominion of Canada. And they closed the Dominion down, and he decided to go into the business himself. And he ran that until 1946, and he sold it to a very nice fellow who I never met, but I talked to on the phone. You had to yell at him because he was deaf as a post in 1946. And he did huge volumes of Sitka collections. Another extractory started in Kamloops. They were collecting what was called bull pine or ponderosa, and it would go to New Zealand and Australia. In 1955, a Dane by the name of Lisbert came to Canada, and he was sent out here because there was some question around the authenticity of origin of seeds, and they wanted to clear that up. So he immediately opened a plant near Courtenay, and he went into partnership on a couple of occasions with different people. Then Manning opened a plant in Qualicum in 1956, and Lisburg and Manning worked together quite often. In the 50s, there were some serious issues both in BC and overseas about authenticity of origin, seed being sold as in coastal Douglas fir when it was really interior Douglas fir. Mr. Lisberg quickly returned to Denmark, but he didn't quite achieve the lofty goals he had intended. Then the BC Forest Service facility opened in 1956 and in Duncan, and fortunately there was some huge crops right after that, which they were able to get a good chance to try everything out. And in 1959, there was this huge demand in Great Britain for Sitka spruce. So Manning built a plant there with a guy named Walter Perlstrom to primary process Sitka spruce cones, so they didn't have to transport huge volumes of cones to the US where they would finish the processing. So they would rough extract them and ship bags of de-winged or winged seed, basically. So yeah. Oh yes, in 1965, that was the other partner that Lisberg had, was George Oakes. And like I say, there was these issues around seed origin. So where do we point to? Sorry?
People are chatting.
Where do we point to?
What has happened here? Okay.
We point at the box?
Try it again.
Yeah, okay. So in 1966, Frank Bernard opened a plant in the Salmon Arm. The Salmon Arm facility, both his and Percy Roos, were strategically located between the interior dry belt Douglas fir and the wet belt Douglas fir, the Shuswap, which a lot of people in Europe will know all about because it performs very well throughout Europe. In 1969, Gordon Roche, rather, he sold to Reed Collins Nurseries, which is a long-standing nursery company, and they operated for many years. In '69, Silva Enterprises, another Forest Service employee who started doing it part-time and then full-time, and they opened Silva Enterprises, not Silva Seed, in Prince George, and primarily targeting the Swedish market for lodgepole pine. And we seem to understand here that lodgepole pine was to fill the gap in wood supply that they projected 50, 80 years down the road. In 1982, I started in business. A few years later, when the Tree Seed Center in Duncan closed, I bought all of their equipment, the old equipment, and which I still use today. And they moved here with the nice yellow and green equipment here, but it still works very well. The federal government asked us in about 1989 if we would form some sort of an association that they could talk to directly as opposed to individually, because there were basically 5 private companies that were processing seed, and we were all having seed tested under ISTA or registered under OECD. So anyway, we've had a loose knit network. We all became very good friends, albeit competitors. And then in 1991, we actually incorporated. It worked very well. We did a lot of things together. We produced a publication together. And unfortunately, Frank retired in 1998 and he sold his business to Quality Seed. Very nice people. They were good collectors, but they were not into processing. So they eventually stopped processing.
Johanna, I just need to share the screen. That's not showing.
Okay.
Keep going.
Anyway, so okay. Okay. And so in 2014, Peter Helenius retired and moved down the block from me on Gabriola Island. And he basically, there was nobody interested in purchasing the business. I mean, really sad. I think it's, you have to be able to do something else on the, as well in order to survive. So 2022, I'm the last man standing, so to speak. And but the good news is that Vernon Seed Orchard Company, and Tia's right here, you can ask her questions about it, has decided to do processing for their own seed orchards, and the facility is built. Some of the equipment is there, but most of it is being moved. So anyway, yeah, this is shows the chronologically the different facilities that were there. If you notice below Western Tree Seed, there's one that says De Hurst. That's the Kamloops one where they were collecting bullpine. There was actually another guy that collected there for a while by the name of Henry Ford, but it wasn't the one building Model A's or Model T's. But anyway, he was kind of a buffoon that we're not sure how much he actually collected. Anyway, so you can see the colors about in chronologically, you know, where they fit. And I just put this one up because I used this when we visited the different facilities in the US, and they kindly showed us all around, and we had some good discussions. You know, after, like I said, after World War I and World War II, there was huge demands for tree species, particularly Sitka spruce and Douglas fir. Domestically, the natural regeneration was the standard. The first nursery was in 1926. It was a test nursery. 1928, the Green Timbers nursery started, and that was the first real production nursery. But the numbers remained quite low until after the war, when they ramped all the way up to 14 million. And then what happened is from 1950 to 62, it was called the Dark Ages of Forestry. And it was a political thing. The amount of seedlings plummeted. And it wasn't until the forest companies really started to have some kind of obligation to reforestation that things started to occur. In 76, you know, it went up 110, and then today, the last 3 or 4 years, it's been kind of hovering around 275 to 30 something. Isn't that right, Spencer? Yeah. Anyway, here's some random facts for you. From 38 to 47, Great Britain imported 13,300 pounds of Sitka spruce seed. I mean, that's huge by today's standards. So, and in 48, Gordon Roche alone collected that many. The other interesting thing is that the Queen Charlotte Islands, or Haida Gwaii as it's called today, there were no squirrels. So Gordon Roche and Manning, they contrived to introduce squirrels to there, but the government wanted to get on board, so they said, well, you know, we'll take credit for it. So they introduced some as well. And the reason they did that is because the demand was so high for Sitka spruce that people were saying they'd go along the rivers and they'd see these huge open grown trees on the edge of rivers, and they'd get out a saw and cut them down into the river, impede the salmon spawning, and there'd be wood and everywhere. And the government came up with a regulation saying you cannot cut down trees unless you use the wood. You cannot cut them down solely for cone or collecting cones. So anyway, there were very few predators. Squirrels flourished, and when you go up there, you can take a snow shovel and scoop them into bags. So it's very interesting. Unfortunately, because of EU regulations and there was you know, the demand here is quite low now to export, and they have their own seed orchards which are doing quite well. And this is Frank Bernard, and he passed away in 2015, and he was a real nice fellow. As a competitor, he was a great mentor, when I went into business, he was right there all the time, you know, giving me advice, and we did lots of projects together on collections. You know, I wanted stuff in the interior, he wanted stuff from the coast, just made good sense to trade. So, and he was the first president of our Tree Seed Dealers Association. And this is a meeting I think Dave was at. Dave Gertis was there for sure. And it was a combined meeting with the Western Forest and Range Seed Council. We had lots of fun. And we had developed a code of ethics about particularly around the authenticity of origin, because, you know, there had been problems in the past. And we wanted to make sure that everybody understood that, you know, we were trying to give them exactly what we said we were. And we produced this publication there. It's online. There are very few hard copies around anymore, but you can find it on. And it was just something we put together with Frank Portlock. He was kind of the editor, and each of the 4 companies, we each took a couple of chapters or a chapter to put together. We had lots of fun with that and a lot of beer. And so what's the future? For the private company point of view, the availability of tree seed from orchards is kind of a mixed blessing for those of us that do have seed orchards, or me and we're a seed orchard company. Wild collections have dropped down, but with all the wildfires and the 2 billion tree program, you know, I think the demand is certainly going to increase. But, you know, the problems are, you know, they're guys like me are dying out, and there's not a lot of experience anymore for particularly cone collection. And Dave and I and others in the room here have been putting on workshops on cone collection. I think the last one was 2018 or 19. Yeah, and we went around a dog and pony show for 4 or 5 different yeah 4 or 5 communities that and we had up to 80 or so people in Prince George, I think, actually. So yeah, so we had lots of fun with it. We were on the road a lot. So yeah, and the evolution of cone collection. Well, in the early days, it was, you know, squirrel caches. And of course, in Washington, Oregon, even Dean Swift, I don't think he's ever collected anything other than from squirrel caches. And you know, Pigott and Peterson, 1996, we did a project where we compared different seed collection methods. And if you properly handle cones after collection, squirrel cache collections are just as good as, you know, a helicopter collection. But anyway, and they can move very large cones. Amabilis fir cones can weigh up to almost 3/4 of a pound, and we have no idea how the squirrels move them into caches. But and I stole this from Kia. It's on my wall in my office. And in the old days, you know, on both sides of the border, things were a little bit more like the Wild West. And you know, in terms of collection, do you offer cash for cones? You know, sometimes people, not everyone is honest. Traditionally, we've also collected from logging, and rarely do we collect specifically fell trees for collection. These days in the interiors, we use a lot of, we try and dovetail collections with harvesting, but it's usually done with processors, which is great because you can lay the trees down nicely, and they're much easier to collect from. And climbing, we do a lot of climbing. You'll love our safety program. We are much better now, but we weren't always as stellar, put it that way. But we have a new forest safety and council. We have to be a little more careful. Yeah, it's actually Jack Woods collecting Douglas fir cones with me. So yeah, so the early helicopter collections were when I came back from Norway, my co-workers and a helicopter pilot invited me over for a beer, and they said, "Hey, we got this great idea. We'll put you in a 200-liter garbage bucket and hang you under a helicopter by a 50-foot lanyard, and you will go up to a tree and you cut the top off with a power saw, and you put a choker around it." If I look afraid, yeah, you're wrong. I was terrified. But we actually did that for quite a while, and we got a temporary permit. The permit expired. And then there was an incident. We flew over a WorkSafe BC inspector. Even in 1978, personal fines, $2,500 a piece. The company got 25,000, helicopter 15,000. So we didn't do it again. So we went into this system. We have a little platform on the side of the helicopter. We would fly up beside the tree. We used a hydraulic shear, reach out, poof, and it would cut the top off. You'd pull it into the back of the helicopter. A lady in Williams Lake had made a liner for the back of the helicopter to keep the pitch off the upholstery. And I have pictures, actually, I could have put in where we had large collections where we had 4 or 5 helicopters all in a row. Really kind of cool. But you always have, the issue around your tail rotor. You have to watch for other trees. You got to pick trees that are exposed. You never like it when you start to see little bits of branch spinning around the blades. And then a helmet is not here yet. I'm hoping he's going to show up with his son Martin. I think he's getting on, but he developed the 2 things, a topper and a rake. And this is a rake, which basically cuts the, you go up to a tree, lower it over the tree, and go down about 6 feet. And when you pull back up, it cuts all the branches. They fall into a basket around the outside edge. They go over, they can do 6 to 10 trees at a time. They go over to a landing, put it on the ground, and the crew bails it out. It's got a self-dumping mechanism, and then the crew picks the cones. You can see this is a marvelous fir here. Those 2 guys on the trailer are pilots, actually. If we have multi-day collections, we'll have usually only 1 more pilot. One guy, he just wanted to see how we did it. But anyway, he's just relaxing. They each do 1 cycle, which is about 2 hours of fuel. And you can see there that there's the rake. The top separates from the bottom, the branches fall out, and the cones are picked from the branches, sacked, and then loaded on a truck. We have a sort of a 6-hour window that we transport them to our area. And you can see how long a piece that you cut off the top of the tree right there. Yeah, this is my former partner, Gerhard, and that's his wife. That's Grand Fir. He's not cutting her head off for not picking enough. He's removing the pitch from her shoes. Grand Fir, you will get an inch of pitch built up on your shoes when you're walking around on the branches picking the cones. And this is the aerial topper. You can take 8 to 10 tops off the, and before you have to go to a landing to dump. And yeah, the drones are coming. It'd be interesting to see what they have in terms of capability. I'm going to leave that to DroneSeed and Sylvie to talk about. Yeah, I'd like to thank you. If you notice how safety conscious we are now, fortunately I have a daughter-in-law that's really good at Photoshop. So, okay.
John, you failed to mention your longest fall from a tree.
No, 70 feet. Yeah, we still do quite a bit of climbing and actually shooting as well.
All right, for our next speaker, I had asked Pigott to talk and add a little diversity to the program, talk a little bit about some of the challenges with recalcitrant seeds so that we weren't totally focused on Pacific Northwest conifers. She unfortunately was not able to be here with us today, and on very short notice, Sylvie Carles from Quebec, who's a research scientist with the program, agreed to take Fabienne's place, and we very much appreciate it. She's had her challenges, learning that she was coming here less than 10 days ago and losing her luggage along the way.
To share it?
Yeah.
We very much appreciate Sylvie you taking the time and you being so persistent with all the challenges you faced here. Inspirational.
Sir. No. Is it okay?
Yeah.
So the challenge is to speak in English, so be kind with me. and I practiced with Melissa yesterday night. Thank Melissa. So the presentation has been prepared by Fabienne, and I will read what she has written. If you have questions, I have she is online, and she will text me the answer. You hear it, Fabienne? So challenges with processing, storage, and pretreatment of recalcitrant species. The Berthier Nursery is a unique Quebec public nursery producing hardwood seedlings for reforestation. You see here the different species we are producing. On the left side are the wet bare wood seedlings, and on the right side the container ones. All species are produced in one season except hickory, which is produced in 2 seasons. For barewood, the general pattern is sowing in the fall, growth next year, extraction the fall year 1, and exceptionally in the spring, if we don't have enough workforce or if the weather is not favorable. Is it okay? Yeah, you understand? Okay, good. That's most important. So black cherry sowing and extraction must be the same year because bud break is very soon in the spring. We recently transferred all the red oak seedling production to a bare wood production because we had early frost 2 consecutive years that destroyed our oak container production. We must indeed wait the leaves to fall before bagging, and for red oak, it can be very late in the autumn. And we confirm that these species can be produced in 1 season, even bare wood. The same scenario should be occurs for no for burr oak, but it's more complicated because its development is slower than red oak. No, help me, machine. This one.
Magic time. Magic time. Watch me do magic. Battery? Battery's okay. Hold on. Sorry, one moment.
Yeah. Hardwood production in Quebec, we are producing 8 species from seeds, oaks, red and burr, maples, sugar and red, yellow birch, black cherry, black walnut, and bittern hickory. The hybrid poplar is produced from cutting. Yes. Oaks, burr and red, and black walnut and bittern hickory are recalcitrant species. That means that they must be extracted, cleaned, and prepared in about 5 weeks.
I don't know.
It's not my luckiest week.
Very bad luck.
So even the computer is not with me.
Sorry, hold on. All right.
So see you soon. So don't go too far. All seeds are received in a burlap except the black walnut seeds, which are received directly in wax. Each bag of all wax has in own identification for traceability. Before treatment, bags are kept in a cold room to avoid drying. All hardwood species are produced by the Berthier nursery. The 4 recalcitrant species are known in Berthier around the first week of November. Work must be done before the soil freezes. The windows is very short, so we need to work hard at the tree seed center to prepare the seed lot. We were lucky last fall because while we had problems with the red hot seed preparation, we also had a very hot fall, but it won't be the same this year. We have many seed lots, big volume and a short time for treatment. You can see here the 4 recalcitrant species, the number of seed lots and the total volume in hectoliter for each species. The reception date for the red hawk is between September 20th to October 14th. For the burr hawk, October 7th to the 13th. Black walnut, October 6th to the 14th, and bitternut hickory, October 5th to the 22nd. The biggest challenge is with black walnut because of the big harvest volume. Each species has its own challenge, and I will detail them next. And the challenge differ from one species to another. This species being deeply dormant, estimate viability with a germination test will be too long. We will not have the information in time for seeding. That's why only cut test is possible to viability estimation. We use 2 samples of 50 seeds per seedlot for hogs and hickory, and 2 samples of 25 seeds per seedlot for walnut, because there is a lot of uniformity in the walnut seedlots. Yes, one animation. And we developed documents for each species to easily and rapidly classify quality after cutting. Nuts in green frame. Nuts in green frames are likely variable, and in the red frame are not likely variable. Is still okay? First species, the red hawk. The challenge with the red hawk is the mixing of big seedlots. Regularly, the same seedlot is received over multiple dates and from different natural forests. We need to mix them to have a better genetic homogeneity when seeding. Our maximum mixing capacity being 10 hectoliter, we have to create too many seedlots. That's why we need to develop a new method to mix big seedlots. Some ideas will be testing this fall. And I just called Fabienne to tell me why are your ideas, and she answered this fall. So this fall, next year for you. Next species, burr hawk. The challenge with this species is the elimination of the caps. Seeding with the caps on doesn't give big seeding. Also, when we determine the number of seeds per hectoliter, the data we use to allocate the seeds, we need to have seeds and no caps. Our method is quite empirical, but it works. Seeds are in this big bin. They pass through a big rotary screen, at the end of which is installed a blower that throws the cups in the different bins around. You have understood? I'm not sure how. Black walnut. The challenge with this species is dehulling. We need to wait that the hull becomes brown and softer. Then nuts are treated with the dehuller. Lot of noise and dirt. Nuts are then mixed to have uniform seed load, then ready to be sown. The last one, beeton hickory, is the easiest one, no challenge. The seeds are sown with all left on, and it gives good results. Conclusion, a lot of work to do in a short time, and direct by reliable evaluation of quality. Oaks should be whole produced barewood next year to avoid fall early frost. And new species will be studied thanks to research projects. All this work is done by the dream team of the DroneSeed Center. 3 employees for treating the seeds, 1 mechanic, 2 technicians, 1 for the plant, 1 for the lab, 1 intern in industrial engineering to reorganize the flow in the center, 3 managers who work for the DroneSeed Center and the nursery. Since 2019, we had 6 retirement from 10 employees. With ISO certification, we built a considerable number of procedures for each treatment step, which is very helpful. And I did it. Thank you. Oh, yes, I give you back.
Thank you.
So it's a pleasure to introduce my next speaker. Me? We're just going to get it loaded here. Do encourage you, any thoughts and ideas for any of our sort of meeting questions or any other questions you have in terms of what is needed in regards to tree seed. We really like your feedback. Melissa's also done some magic for those of you online or for those of you who would rather put your opinions in electronic format. You know, we are trying to gather information. What are your priorities? What do we need to target in terms of tree seed, education, knowledge, convincing people it's important, raising awareness. Some of you at the other workshop know that reproductive biology is kind of a theme of mine. If you go around the corner, that's our reproductive biology hallway. So please take a look at some of our posters over there as well. I'm just filling in time before my presentation is up. Any questions from the audience now that we're just waiting for this to come up? Is everybody hearing everything all right? I believe after my presentation, we have a break. Is that correct? No, Nabil's presentation and then a break. And Nabil and I sort of coordinated our presentations together. He's going to sort of provide the technical end of things, and I'm taking this opportunity to try to be provocative and sort of opening it up. And I don't say I have the answers to everything. I have lots of questions. And like I said, I want to be provocative, but I also want to be involved in finding the answers. I don't want to just throw at questions and not be involved and leave it to people. So my title, Continuous Improvement Beyond the Buzzwords.
Share with folks online. A lot of moving parts.
That was all magic. Melissa's magic, thank you. It's been wonderful. How many people do we have online today?
18.
18 people online today. We had over 30 on Thursday, so it's great that we're able to extend this. We really wanted to have people live here and gain new relationships and meet new people, but obviously some people weren't able to join us. Continuous improvement, you know, a lot of my talks start with a bit of history and where do things go back to. You know, a lot of it falls back to the 1920s with Walter Schuhart, a statistician, you know, really the father of statistical quality control with these simple control charts. trying to identify special cause variation, really advanced over time to this ISO 9000 certification, this, plan, do, study, act, the Kaiser cycles. There's lots of methods that people follow through in terms of continuous improvement methodologies. One of the things is a lot of them are very manufacturing based and they want to remove variation. And I think we have to think about our conifers, our long-lived species, not conifers, tree seeds in general, long-lived species. That variation is very important. So we have to be very cautious. We don't want to be removing that variation. Our trees are some of the, especially conifers, are some of the most genetically diverse organisms on the planet. And so that's very important, especially with our long rotations. I think this really, and I always use this statement, it complicates the direct adaptation of agricultural techniques and practices. It doesn't make it impossible, but we aren't calibrating something or making it so systematic as easily as the very low genetic variation found in some of our agricultural crops. So that there needs to be a lot more work involved. So it complicates, and I think this is really underappreciated from the seed science community, and that's where all the seed science education comes from. So I think there's a little disconnect, and I think we need to do a better job in terms of really focusing on the variability of our product and how we get that into curriculums and being discussed. There's lots of continuous improvement things. I think this is Daniel Locke that might have come off the slide there. I just picked these four things that I thought were interesting. Stop fixing and start improving. So let's not just try to get back to where we were when we have a problem. Let's look at continuous improvement. You know who put this paper together? Some sort of manager. I was kind of offended by this because it could be really anybody who sort of initiates a change within an organization. Maybe they're the one who improves it, but I really feel like a lot of it comes from the ground floor of where things are happening. So I didn't really like that part, but I didn't cut it out either. The best practices are the ones you already have, so that they provide some context. Just going and borrowing and buying, they don't have the context of your operations, and sometimes you have to do a lot of work. So look internally first for how you can improve things. Maybe some of the technology will look outwards, but in terms of actual practices, look inwards and encourage innovation among your own employees. The third, I think we all face, changing behavior is more important than changing processes, and it ain't always easy. Change management is a contact sport and difficulties arise. If I have to explain that to you, you're very fortunate. If you aren't failing, you aren't trying, and I'll just, trying/learning. And so I think small scale experimentation can pay off in big ways, but some experiments will fail, and you have to go into it with that sort of attitude. In order to learn, you're probably going to do some failing. Nobody's saying that I should be killing, a few hundred hectoliters here at 80 degrees Celsius and seeing if that's a good thing or not. Start small scale and work up, but try different and innovative practices in your operations. I'm going to talk a little bit about this slide, and sort of over the last few years, we really have this attitude of continuous improvement versus the answer that comes from the literature. And it seems very fixated and becomes a myth or a legend or something that's you never want to change. And I really love the sort of continuous improvement, because everything we've learned and are doing now are just stepping stones from people who came before us, and it was the best available information. And I think it goes back to the variability of our product. I'm sort of known, good or bad, for my love of quotes. This is one of my favorites. Data is not information, information is not knowledge, and knowledge is not wisdom. And we try to get that third end. It's not the data you collect, it's what you use it for and what you gain. So I've got 4 bullets. some of the things that I see become answers. The first one, is it really representative of the species? And the things that really comes to mind, we supply a lot of seed for research purposes, and Spencer or I have to almost beg someone to use more than one seed lot. And we know that scientific paper is going to come out with the authoritative of this thing on Sitka spruce. And, I'm usually very happy or uncomfortable with the sampling that they've done and saying this is the characteristics of the species. So I think it's very important. And when you are into the literature, question that, how representative is it just because it has that species name on the title? Our treatment's really operational feasible, something that sometimes that scaling up is really not possible or worthwhile. And sometimes I think we need a better connection between the work at the academic institutions. There isn't very much, certainly in Canada, on tree seeds, and what is actually possible in operations. If there's an environmental component, are these really practical, or really span the range? And from a purely statistical point, if you have a well-designed experiment, what do you do if all your interactions are significant? You still need to make decisions. Maybe you just treat everything as a random effect and look at, percent of variation, and that helps you make decisions. But sometimes we get fixated on some of those things, and they aren't helping answer the questions. I came upon this last year, this Gardner hype cycle. I'm not sure if you're familiar with it at all. There's some need, and there's some sort of technology trigger here. And then there's this sort of peak of inflated expectation. And that's really what, research funding is based on. Often we go through this trough of disillusionment. And sometimes what I think that's where operational support kind of vanishes. And then there's, there is some truth to this. And then there's sort of this plateau of productivity. So I think it's a cycle. How can we be more realistic at the beginning to sort of predict this is where the technology will end up? I don't know if everybody could read that cartoon. Wilson's working on a gene program that will make modified vegetables 100% organic. Another theme I also come back to is sort of the extinction of extension. I think science is going deeper and deeper with new technologies to unravel our mysteries. The gaps between science and operations is widening. I sometimes refer to this as the Grand Canyon. So, when did technology transfer die? I think we need it more than ever. And it's not just what appears in, the referee journals. That's important knowledge. We need sort of what I refer to as sort of this knowledge portfolio and some diversity there, from the very practical to the highly scientific, and even reporting on what the failures are, so people aren't repeating ourselves. And certainly this is one area the Tree Seed Working Group News Bulletin seems to fill in. We have a very very light editorial policies, so it's really an opportunity or place to share things. This probably goes back about 30 years where I found this, but I thought it's an interesting way of looking at sort of four different research types, and they might be sort of associated with different types of researchers in terms of high or low corporate impact, high or low scientific impact, and certainly, trying to reach for the eagles where we have science that does both. There is a place for these cows in terms of really low scientific impact, but a lot of corporate impact, and certainly places for this. We want to avoid these dogs as much as possible, or totally. Some of the things that I found interesting from this paper in terms of managing for the eagles, hopefully we all have the opportunity, and we don't always, it's like family members, we don't always have the choice of who we work with, but if you do, you know which people can make things happen. So try to work with those people as much as possible. encourage problem-driven research versus just method-orientated, just borrowing what you take from school and trying to apply it. Try to attach those sort of techniques to real problems. And also, again, encourage some risk-taking. Start small, build up, but try different things. Few little things, I'm always skeptical of, this one paper that shows something quite weird. So I'm always looking for generalizations, whether it's, extended stratification is good and vigor is improved. We can germinate over wider conditions with extended stratification. These sort of things I like to see where they're verified across various species before saying this is the way things are. I won't talk about this very much through the tour, but I think it's one of our continuous improvement activities with our target moisture content, where we really have some specific targets for different species. This is based on some good work where we actually stratified seed at different moisture contents from 15 to 25. And there really is a peak, both in germination capacity and in speed of germination. So I encourage you to look at target moisture content if you aren't employing that already. And Nabil will talk about this, but I will introduce it. We do have a feedback loop from nurseries. Some are better at providing results than others. How do they compare to our test results? And, we have some issues. Our ABs are notoriously lower in germination at the nursery. We don't have a huge sample size. And there's lots of reasons for this difference. This is what we're classifying in our testing regime, the standard ISTA 4 times the length of the seed coat, whereas, this is what a nursery person is classifying as a germinant. So it's much later. There's lots of opportunities for fall down. Nabil will possibly talk about, different stages, the germination environments, pre-treatments. This is something that comes up. When we look at this, we know we're not getting exactly the same duration of stratification. We might be shipping seed early. Should we extend it and see if it's real, or do we really want a quality assessment of something as it leaves the seed center? And we're continually talking about that, of what makes more sense. And certainly sample sizes are 400 seeds versus really a variable number of blocks. So it's really my talks just to sort of bring that introduction, start thinking about things and talking about them. And that's a big thing of this meeting, building relationships and sort of continuing some of the work that we've started here today. Thank you. Our next speaker is Nabil Khadduri. I've enjoyed very much working with Nabil and his work. He works on the nursery side, but is fortunate to work right beside the seed center in Washington State and Jeff's team. And so they provide a very interesting perspective, and I welcome Nabil to take over. Yeah.
How's that for volume? Good. Thanks, Melissa. So for those of you who aren't familiar with our location in Washington State, we're immediately, here we are in beautiful, balmy British Columbia, and we're just 4 hours down the road here, about 100 kilometers south of Seattle. Just outside of Olympia. And the last time I visited the Tree Seed Center was in 2006. And this is what I looked like by the end. That was, that was actually that evening was the famous Hanukkah Eve windstorm. And so what was a 4-hour journey turned into more like a 12-hour journey. So, but what you don't see is in my hands, I'm clutching the Tree Seed Center seed manual that Dave had given us earlier that day. And this has really been a wealth of information. It's available online and it's hard to believe it's 20 years old now. We still ask our new nursery and seed center employees to read it cover to cover. It's that good. And 20 years since it's been, the Tree Seed Working Group News Bulletin, thank you, Melissa and Dave, has been a great source of updates on some of the practices that are described in there. So here's a look at our nursery. It's primarily a coastal Douglas fir nursery, about 70% of what we do. And down here in our bare root fields, we just sow Douglas fir seed as a 2-year stock type. 1 year at high density in the field. We then lift, transplant a second season for our what we call a 1+1 stock type, fairly large seedling. Along with Douglas fir, we grow the following species, listed here in roughly descending order of the number that we do. And we start those in the greenhouse, either as a 1-year large cell outplant or as a small plug for 1 season and then transplant an additional season into the field. Our slightly less photogenic seed center is sticking out here in the back, and you can see that we're immediately adjacent. Here's our cold storage facility, roughly $10 million Canadian seed inventory. So we're approximately 1/10 of the size of the Tree Seed Center. And over here is a building that houses part of our seed processing equipment and our seed lab. So for a greenhouse grower, there's this natural conflict between space use efficiency and seed use efficiency. And the grower obviously wants to maximize occupancy and the greenhouse. And I kind of hesitate to put this picture on the right here to a bunch of seed lovers such as yourselves, but that is a dumpster full of recently thinned germinants. And the seed center just sort of averts their eyes when they walk by and see that. So again, there's this natural tension between the nursery and the seed center. We would like to have high quality, high germ seed. The seed center does all this work here to ensure that. And it's very important that we use that seed as efficiently as possible, especially in this vertically integrated system that we're in. Ideally, we have a positive feedback loop where we have this lab tested, high quality, high germ, high vigor seed. The nursery then requests an appropriate amount of seed. Spencer, I know that you beat this drum. And based on our past germination experience with that seed lot, that species in general. And then after the sowing process and harvest, we evaluate again our seed use efficiency with the seed center for future decisions. So one of the challenges of seed use efficiency is that oftentimes greenhouse germination differs from lab germination, generally lower. And Dave talked about the diversity that we deal with. One of the ways to try to reduce variability, there's several methods in lab testing, a fairly controlled environment that we're familiar with. Photoperiod, not so important for our conifers that we deal with, but certainly the warm temperatures that we have, the uniformly moist environment. And in theory, we're only bringing in disease, seed-borne pathogens when we're lab testing. And germination is objectively defined for most of our conifers 4 times the length of the seed coat. There's still variability there. And so, it's the standards 4 reps of 100 seeds. And Dave will be quick to point out that just because it says 90% germination, could be 87, 93% germination, still within tolerance. At our facility, we happen to do, you'll see a photo, 8 reps of 50 seeds just for ease of handling. And we have the space to do that. So the more semi-controlled environment of a greenhouse, a lot more variability, temperature. Even the most modern greenhouses and irrigation systems are going to have variability in terms of warm and cool spots in the greenhouse. You get a cold spring like we just had and rising energy prices. There's a lot of temptation for a grower to bump down those greenhouse temperatures, even during the critical germination phase. And so that can have a year-to-year impact. Every time you're irrigating the greenhouse to keep that uniformly moist environment, you're systematically cooling that environment as well. Lots of additional pest pressures. I'll just focus on disease ones that can be brought in with the soil media. It can be the containers themselves if they're not properly sterilized, the hard surfaces, not to mention bunnies and birds and things like that. So germination is called later. This is Dave's slide here. over time, we've defined germination in the greenhouse. Previous to this, the birdcage stage, but now we just define germination as emergence of the seed coat above the seed surface, which is putting us still later than what we'd see in the lab, but closer there to what you might see in the lab. So even though there's more variability with the number of seed lots we're rapidly sowing, we're still only generally doing 1 rep of 100 seeds that we're actually evaluating, which isn't really enough. So it's when we do trials that we're doing multiple reps of at least 100 seeds to get a better look at what's actually going on. So here's Dave's graph again, blowing up, and really robust data set. And again, on the y-axis is germination fall down. So anything below 0 there, any negative number represents germination fall down. And Dave, I've taken the liberty to change these to US abbreviations here. And I've never fully understood the BC. I think it's your way of getting back at us for not adapting the metric system fast enough. But here's some Pacific Grand and Noble Fir are problem species for us. We have similar fall down. We do some high grading to try to make that up. Red alder here, our only deciduous tree that we grow, is pelletized up here. We don't pelletize it, so we tend not to have as great a germination capacity fall down. However, we're much less seed use efficient because we just throw lots of seed at the problem and end up doing a lot of thinning. And I'm going to talk a little bit about Western hemlock coming up here, which we've had greater fall downs and have done some things to try to improve. So an advantage of operations is that instead of the hundreds of seed lots that are dealing with, you have these large seed lots that you can apply in an economic sense, bigger strategies like sanitation treatments, like hydrogen peroxide or bleach, running water rinse. I imagine this afternoon we'll see the running water rinse tanks here. Here's a look at our setup, and that can be done pre and or post strat. Can help with a number of things, including disease control. Target moisture content is probably the most important concept that we've picked up from the Tree Seed Center here. And in terms of surface drying the seed, and it's almost like a kind of moisture priming. You're giving the seed everything it needs without enough moisture to actually go to that third stage of germination and actually move on. And that's allowed us to do things like extend stratification beyond what the lab test is. We do that for basically all our species, some length of extension of stratification. And we can do things like delayed dryback, like the Edwards dryback of true firs. We do that with white pine as well. And there's mid-strat high grading, basically a poor man's IDS technique that we'll do while we're in the middle of strat, end of strat. We'll dry off the seed, aerated tank will then, the live seed is picked up more weight, and then we'll float off the dead so that weren't able to be separated at the seed center because they're like the exact same weight. And thermal priming, that's just a fancy way of saying additional heat units that you add to the seed in a controlled environment before you're going out to a larger greenhouse or especially field environment. So Western hemlock, Tsuga heterophylla, notoriously slow germinating species for us. And so there's been a number of things that we've done. Over the years, we've actually reduced and now eliminated our chemical treatment. It was the best practice at the time because we weren't surface drying our seed dry enough. On Dave's chart there, it goes down all the way 28, sometimes 27% surface dry condition. With that proper surface drying, we were able to take away the chemical and not have mold buildup. And that has allowed us to extend the stratification on it with good results. And we've also done some thermal priming to speed things up. When you get the slow germination here, even though you can see these late germinants can get overtopped or late spring sun events and things like that can take them out. So here's that same graph that Dave showed. It was a lab trial with 3 seed lots, and you can see the difference between 30 and 60-day strat there. Significant increase in germination speed, no significant difference at the end there in germination capacity. But when we learn that in the lab, we can apply that to the greenhouse. And here's 2 lots in the greenhouse with just showing the 30 and 60-day strat. On the x-axis now is just growing degree days instead of time. And you can see that the 60-day strat not only bumped up germination speed, but in this case, actually significantly increased germination capacity. And to touch on the variability, each of these little dots represents one of the 4 reps there. The thermal priming I mentioned, the artificial heating of seed before. The short prime in yellow and the long prime in red just represent a 1x or 2x length of heat accumulation and the seed here. And you can see for all three of these hemlock lots that we tested, they increased germination speed. Extended stratification and thermal priming, I want to caution is that, like Dave said, you can't just assume, even, this is just 2 or 3 seed lots we're testing. You have to be careful with older seed lots in particular. Those might not always be the best treatments for these older species. So a couple of years ago, did a webinar and a live poll, and it was mostly US and Canadian participants. There's an anonymous poll here. And so who's using these treatments? And you can see on the left there, the blue and green combined, more than 3/4 of the operations were doing extended stratification. And by extended stratification, I mean more than what would be the ISTA standard for that species. And a smaller but number of folks doing delayed dryback, and it's very species dependent, true firs, white pine in our case. And smaller yet, but significant number of people doing mid or end of strat high grading and thermal priming. Finally, sometimes nursery germination is higher than in the lab. That's something that we saw with Western larch, where our greenhouse performance was actually doing better than the lab. And when we did a standard lab test, 24-hour soak, plating the seeds, putting them in the chilling room, we were seeing this bulking up of pathogens even before we went and put the seeds in the germinator. And by the end of a 3-week test, we were getting this kind of mess of pathogen buildup, which was taking out some of the germinants. When we applied some operational treatments to that, including a chemical treatment up front, as well as a running water rinse, as well as surface drying the seed and keeping in a mesh bag before we plated up, then we were getting these better results here and getting better correlation between the lab and greenhouse germination. And so for this particular species larch, talking with the industry, we found that between 5 and 30 minutes of hydrogen peroxide followed by a 5-minute rinse is a good protocol for them, even at doing that at the very beginning before imbibition. The toughest thing is when you get fall down that you don't catch either in lab or greenhouse germination tests. Those both do well. Cedar is very known to self. And every once in a while in this sea of cedar here, we'll get a seed lot that consistently year over year, in the absence of what may look like saltburn or some sort of root disease, it's just some sort of inbreeding or something that's happened there where we'll have to remove that seed lot, because in this case, it was up to 25% of the lot was doing that. We talked about true firs, and in labs, we're familiar. Sometimes you might see stunted radicals or things like that. When we ask our thinning crews when they go to thin to actually ruffle the seedlings and sort of pre-lodge any, so then we're not thinning the good ones and as opposed to bad. And this all leads to seed inventory management decisions, tough decisions on, when do you use, when is it time to sideline older lots that are losing vigor and germination capacity, or like I showed, lots that don't predict. But sometimes we just have to use what we have, because that's what we have. And increasing reforestation demand and need for seed, that might be more and more the case. So really the take home message here is that there's a reforestation pipeline that we've seen here. It's really pretty clear that nurseries are the primary place where we can increase seed use efficiency. But in order for that to happen, you have to work with the seed supplier as closely as possible. And even though we're vertically integrated, our program, we find that we still constantly have to work on that communication, avoid the finger pointing, find out and dig deeper where things can be improved. For example, this year we are putting an investment into improving our sowing equipment, which is going to improve not only our nursery performance, but also seed use efficiency. And I just want to finish this going into break here. My alma mater is New Mexico State University. This is a research center where I worked at in Mora, New Mexico. This spring, they just suffered the largest wildfire in state history. It's a large state. This is a 140,000 hectare fire. and the research center is located right there. And there was heroic efforts done by the staff to salvage the seed bank, one of the largest seed banks in the Southwest, and then got police escort to go back in and salvage 200,000 seedlings or so. So yeah, future tree seed supply is definitely at risk. So thank you.
Thank you, Nabil.
You're welcome.
Let's do that. Copies in the other rooms. There might be some snacks in there as well.
Probably answer it directly. Let's see. Oh, yeah. There we go. All right. It's gonna get a little loud, Kathy. What growth media do you use?
We use a 80% peat moss, 20% large vermiculite, coarse vermiculite, I should say. And then the peat moss comes from Western Canada. It's a coarse blonde peat. So pretty good aeration porosity, low bulk density. But we do add the perlite in there to further reduce our bulk density because roots grow in air, not water, right? And
Still hear you? Can you hear us, Guthrie?
Yeah, I can hear you. It's a bit loud, so can you repeat the first?
So
what
yeah,
you said
80% peat,
first? Sorry.
20% perlite, and then we'll incorporate different types of slow release fertilizer into that.
Okay, cool. Yeah, thanks.
Okay,
Thanks
great.
a lot.
Probably going
Thank you.
Okay, for everyone online, I'm just gonna pause the recording. There's coffee break for half an hour, and I need to charge some things. So you guys are welcome to chat amongst yourselves online. You won't disturb anybody.
Yeah, you're answering all the questions.
When's this all look at you?
So we wanted to do something different with our program. These sometimes, fall flat on their face, and
Okay,
sometimes
so
there's just.
You guys are talking, we're gonna pass this back and forth, but not too close.
Questions and answers, so.
So do we get to decide if they fall flat on their face? That's the role.
Well, you can have an input, yeah. So I'd just like to introduce our panel. Michael Postma at the far end. He's the manager of the Tree Seed Center here in British Columbia. Jeff DeGraan, Seed Program Specialist for Washington State. Johanna Gårdebrink from Svenska.
Skogsplantor, so the Swedish state forest company.
And she's sort of the ISF representative too, and Pigott from Yellow Point Propagation. And I'd like to open it up, in case this falls flat. I have about 7 or 8 questions here that we could fill in with, but I'd rather have the audience sort of participate and start the discussion up. So in terms of cone seed processing, does anybody have questions? And others from the audience can offer sort of their opinions as well. Natasha.
How do you see the automated systems in agriculture influencing the seed and cone processing going forward?
Dave, can you repeat the questions later?
So any influence on sort of the automated systems in agriculture and what role they might play in tree seed processing?
I'll start with saying, we're seeing opportunities to incorporate some of those practices on the nursery side. On the cone and seed processing side, we're still pretty basic. I mean, we're kind of aware of some of the stuff that's out there, but we're definitely not to a point where we're incorporating things. Our particular facilities on kind of in crisis management mode right now because of some recent developments. So we're just trying to build a facility to house what we might do in the future. So I don't think that we have anything particular. I can't think of anything in particular on that side that I could offer. Don, you got anything?
Well, one of the things Dave said earlier that I slightly disagree with is about looking inward. I think sometimes you have to look outward to agriculture and some of these other fields. And one example is when we were at the fish hatchery the other day, there was these beautiful trays that would substitute for these very expensive aluminum ones behind us for drying cones and seeds. And they were very easy design. I think they'll be quite a bit more affordable. So I think you have to look. I've been meaning to go to some of the berry processing facilities in the valley to take a look at how they handle fruits and seeds.
Well, we are looking into mostly phytosanitary stuff that they do treat agriculture crop with today. Perhaps looking into some IVU treatment for just a broad cleaning of seeds.
Some what treatment?
Some just,
Ultraviolet, is it?
yeah.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't get that. Yeah.
Natasha, you heard, David's talk, but maybe David, you sort of have some direct, very large objectives in terms of moving agricultural technology into tree seed processing. So if we could.
Yeah, we're looking at making what for us is a pretty major investment in an optical cleaning machine, and that technology is coming directly from the flour milling and food industry. So they're doing everything from taking ergot out of wheat lots or bits of rubbish and crap out of nut crops and cranberry crops and things like that. These are expensive machines, but they do work to a very, very high standard. And the throughputs, the potential throughputs are phenomenal. And at the moment we use a lot of hand grading and picking, and labor's in massive short supply, and those levels of automation where we can shift maybe 8 or 10 tons an hour, if we so wished, is really important. I'd also like to take a snap.
That's possible.
Thank you, Dave. Certainly, we are currently considering some capital investments, and we're looking at agriculture and mining. I know Don's been involved in looking at some agricultural shows at various parts of equipment, and I'm always interested in where can we make improvements and where can we find the improvements. One of the local colleges here did buy an optical sorter. It hasn't been commissioned yet, but it's also something that we're very interested in seeing how it's going to work. One of the comments I'd make about an optical sorter is it may work on tree seed, but Dave always says tree seed is quite variable. But the other thing we're looking at is just with the pitch, what happens with an optical sorter when with the forest seed has so much pitch? That is one of the enemies we deal with. So we're always kind of looking outside the box and trying to see what can we find, what improvements can be made.
There's a question online from Steve Jones, who said optical sorters for what species and can it deal with empty seeds?
That's still in talking to the optical seed supplier. That's still in a trial. They actually have asked for trial samples of our seeds so they can try and set it up. And these would be research sized units, they're called. They're not production units for agriculture, do tons and tons per hour, where we're talking pounds per hour, not tons per hour. So
Dave, would you like to comment on that, Steve's question?
Yeah, we've been looking at this for 2 to 3 years now, and we're at the point of purchasing a machine. You've got to have optical differences, and you're quite right, the amount of variation does reduce your options. But when you're thinking about removing resin from seed lots or bits of trash, dead easy. And also seed weight is relatively easy, but we're dealing with circa 400 species, and our target species are, to make it work, are broadleaves, where we're actually looking to germinate and produce a very small radical, and those are and that goes straight into the nursery the following day. And And we can identify those small radicals very, very accurately because they are, rather than the seed color, they have got a more consistent color.
I'll give you this, Laura.
I probably can talk loud enough.
Laura.
Where we actually have set samples in the college. Marilyn sent us to a sheet. Yes, we sent them to Saskatchewan to a company there. We sent samples for the follow-up, and we sent it to the state. And they got a couple of years ago. I haven't received the back, but they told me verbally that they were not successful in separating those two species. Because we were really interested actually with the Western red cedar, because oftentimes you get those black seeds, and you know, separating them out is just, it's so difficult because they're obviously filled seeds and they're you know, they're the same weight as the rest, but they got fungal or there's problems with those seeds. So you know, that was a definite difference, but it seems to be another. Folks online, just like get that started, summarize what folks said.
Pardon me?
The microphone will far away now. Just summarize that.
So we have had some trial seeds that sent out, and so far we haven't had any positive results for us to look at it any further.
Nabil Khadduri made a comment that the company has tested seeds for us, easy for debris and not for empty seeds.
Yep.
So it might be a little bit of stretch. This is changing over from the sorting by color and stuff. But one thing that I think we've benefited from the developments in the agriculture community is we just bought a brand new X-ray machine. A lot of you probably already have a digital X-ray, but it's so great to have something that we can use as an active cleaning tool. And we bought a CubTech. And just the quality of the imagery, it just really is, I think, is going to really change and help the way we adjust our machines. And then we can just actively take a sample in off the floor and, you know, work off of the information we get from that. And it's just, I think it's going to really improve the quality of our seed lots. So that is an example of, you know, where we're taking advantage of something that was pretty much developed more for an agricultural side, but you know, with the same kind of needs in mind, where we're benefiting a lot from it. So.
And I know the National Tree Seed Center and the Quebec Tree Seed Centers have also just purchased X-ray machines. Sheila as well has some experience, and I'll let her speak.
Incotech in the Netherlands actually uses X-rays to sort individual seeds of tomato. They sort on a pound seed basis, and it seems to be very effective. So I think it's doable.
I know sometimes some facilities look at the cost and it's very prohibitive, and you know, what are the gains for that amount of capital outlay? Michael?
It's a really good question, Dave. The better quality X-ray machines are very capital intensive, and it's not always 100% clear what the benefit is. I've certainly considered, is there a way we can set up those kind of capital investments maybe in a cooperative model or some other kind of model where other areas can benefit from it? The machine we have is considered an operational, a research unit, but what you're buying is not the machine itself. You're actually buying the software license to use it, and those tend to be time limited. The brand we have after 8 years, the software license has expired, so we're on borrowed time. And the way the licensing is configured, if the motherboard on the computer fails, you have to start over and buy a new unit. The machine itself will probably last 40, 50, 60 years, but you're actually buying the software and the license to use it, not the actual machine.
So a lot of that is really tied to the medical field, and you know, that's sort of affordable within that realm. But you know, 8 years, we're not recovering costs on something like that. For us, it's a very useful tool. We do all of our estimates of germination, viable seed percentage for one of our very rare endangered species, white bark pine, where we're not even going to consider, germination testing them. We want some sort of non-destructive assessment of what we have to aid with sowing decisions.
The NFLS is noted in the chat. It's very effective, even if it's expensive. We send 100% full seed sticks to get
Some other questions from the audience before I look at my list? Sorry, Dave.
One thing that surprised me enormously over this last week is we've got a very hard push from the state and the public in the UK to become more energy efficient and greener in our practices. And I noticed the kiln temperatures you're using over here in North America are relatively high compared to what we use. And I know in Scandinavia, where electricity is cheap, it's because of hydro production. It's a lot cheaper than the energy we're using. And when we do a development now, we come under a lot of pressure to green it and make sure we have the highest U values, that we're using green energy sources. I just want to know people's views on why there isn't more concentration on effective energy use, because it does seem to me that it's lacking a bit over here.
Well, just note, I think Marilyn's talk this morning really showed some of the gains that we've made in terms of what our traditional methods and required time lengths versus what we're doing now. I don't think we've done an analysis on energy savings, but I think it's quite significant.
Yeah, I'll add something.
Don't hold it too close.
Sorry. Comment I'd like to add is that we are always looking at energy savings. We've had to take it step by step. We've converted, for example, all our office to LED lighting, and we've used those type, but big energy savings require big capital investments. Unless you have a failure, then you can operationalize it. We're replacing our boilers, our last boiler as we speak, with a new modern efficient unit. The old ones were 35 years old. Working with the architect and the engineers on our freezer replacement project, we did spec out some greener insulation, but no manufacturer would give us any warranty with it. And that's one of the issues we are facing. When you want to commercialize something and you're operating in the commercial or industrial sphere, trying to get a warranty is pretty tough. So are you willing to take on the risk if there's a failure? And here we're operating with public money, and generally the answer is no, we're not willing to take that risk. We need a warranty if we're doing some capital purchases.
Or $100 million seed inventory, it's, anyone else want to check?
I'll just add, we're in the early phases of designing our new facility, and there's a major push in Washington to start getting away from use of natural gas. There's some municipalities prohibiting installation of natural gas residences and stuff. So just because of the BTUs produced, it's a tool we're going to need up front to make sure we can operate now, but we are looking in our new design at alternate approaches, something, keeping our mind open that we'll be able to put natural gas in, but that doesn't mean we'll always be able to use it as a government agency and stuff like that. So we're going to be exploring a lot of different options for producing the heat that we need, using different means that are more environmentally responsible and that we can sell to our leaders and stuff.
I can go on. Well, so our next step in Sweden, we normally burn our coals for the heat and the energy, but the next step will be solar energy, most likely, to be more self.
I guess the thing you have to weigh too is how long are you using the heat for? How long do you process for? And are you going to gain any more than the gasoline burned by the employees coming to work every day? So.
I do question the need of the use of heat per se. because what we're really trying to achieve is increasing the water holding capacity of the air we're passing through. And I'm wondering whether heat is the most efficient way to do it, or whether humidity reduction is a better option, especially with silica gel machines that are now available to reduce humidity.
I'm sure Fabian has some online comments here, but just taking our drawing line, for instance, you know, they've converted to water activity and humidity based versus a heat specified dryer. Michael's looked at some of that, and maybe you can comment on different environments and how applicable it might be.
I'd like to start by saying we're only using the heat for the lodgepole pine. For the other species, it's just air circulation, and the motors we have will actually, in a closed environmental, closed container, the kiln, will heat the air to almost 35 degrees Celsius just by running the motors. For the drying line, we've looked at it, we've considered it, but reading the research and the papers from the technicians from Quebec, you need a stable, constant humidity. And here on the coast of British Columbia, our humidity really varies. Unfortunately, this building wasn't built for stable humidity. So it is a consideration. What do we do when we repurpose? When we build a new freezer, what do we do with the existing 3 chambers? Can we use that for any kind of seed drying or anything else? Because we'll have 3 insulated chambers. We're just not, we won't be running them at freezing temperatures, but we have some options, so we're considering it.
That's certainly what we did with our old.
Yeah, so there's a really good article in the Tree Seed Working Group Bulletin on some of the things Quebec has done, and some of the units they built are really simple, and they just need it's a stable humidity, and you can dry cones quite relatively quickly and with any kind of insulated box. Anybody else for John?
It's another case of looking outside the box, because in the wood industry, particularly in Western North America now, the dehumidification kilns are becoming very popular. So, I think in the next few years they'll become a relatively efficient, like I said.
Yeah.
You're looking at evolving your processes for seed extraction and management of that seed. Is there anything you really think you need from the people supplying that seed to you in response to actually part of that evolution or to do better in the future?
I'm deaf.
Do you want to repeat that, Ian, or shall I paraphrase?
As seed processors who are developing new facilities, is there anything you require from the seed providers in the future to improve the way that seed is supplied to you and how you can process it?
Sure.
A good uniform product that's been well handled up to that point. I'm a big proponent of good seed handling, right out of the tree all the way to the facility. And it's a constant battle because there's always turnover and you have to re-educate everyone. But I think as long as the collectors are picking it just right before it flares on the tree, where so much of the moisture has been removed from the cones, and then it just becomes a case of bringing, depending on what species it is, bringing a product that's as close as possible to being ready to be extracted. That there's not going to have to be a lot of additional tending. Like sometimes we'll get cones in that were picked too early, and we'll have to turn them in the cone shed for a while until they dry sufficiently to be left alone without risk of mold and stuff like that. So it's just really thinking about not trying to match what's convenient to the collector as far as collections go to getting it collected, but think more about the biology of the seed and what's best for the seed, and making sure everybody handling it all along the way once it comes off that tree is thinking about that and trying to get to the facility or to a place where it's safe and can not incur negative impacts as soon as possible.
It sounds like it comes back to what Dave was saying, just talk about educated, seed biology.
Yeah, and you can't take anything for granted, because a lot of people talk a good talk, but then when you see what they actually do, it's they've been living in their own little silo, and they think what they do is great, but they haven't been forced to deal with the end product.
Yeah, in some of the other talks I've given, I always called cones tree eggs, and you know, we also I have a good slide showing a pile of burning cones, and I say, well, if you're not going to look after the cones before they're extracted, you might as well burn them. We've had semi-trailers loaded with cones arrive from that for custom processing that had $100,000 worth of cones that much invested already, and they hadn't looked after them, and they got almost nothing out of it. One of the really simple things to do is to pre-clean either at the site where they're harvested, either in the wild or in the orchards. There's some very simple models of little shaking tables, or even static tables that you can get rid of that debris, and certainly it makes a big difference to the people that are extracting the seed.
So I think the common theme amongst the panel is just the collectors need to do quality assurance monitoring all along. And I mean, we do a lot of that once the cones arrive here. They're immediately sampled. They're tested for moisture, usually within 24 hours of them arriving on site. Visually inspected, they're inspected under the microscope. So the more the collector can do up front and just knowing what they're providing, they can prevent a lot of problems down the line.
Yeah, I'll just do one last comment and then hand the mic over to you, Brian. I think one of the things in terms of when we're looking for new employees, we want people to really understand that this is a perishable product. And like our panel was saying, you know, right off the tree, that's the highest moisture content that material is going to be at, the most susceptible it is to damage. And we really have to treat it like an egg at that stage.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. Brian Barber, Select Seed. A follow-up question to Ian's, and appreciate the response received about paying attention to the biology and the condition of the crop. But we have been using burlap sacks for, you know, the collections and the storage, etc. And it's very labor intensive, and they're not recyclable. Other containers that we can consider that would also be helpful in terms of the efficiencies at the receiving end and the cone seed processing.
Thank you, Brian. Actually, that's a really timely question. It's on my to-do list to actually figure out how to recycle the burlap, or what can we do with them. One of the problems with recycling, of course, is sanitization, but that's another issue. But certainly with our British Columbia species, how do you dry them? How do you get consistent drying with any other type of container? So that's, you know, one technical challenge that needs to be solved. But I don't have any magic answers, but we're certainly looking at other jurisdictions and looking how else can we either reuse the sacks, or can we recycle them?
I think too, I mean, I think the solutions are going to end up being kind of species specific in a lot of cases, just because of the dynamics of the different cones. You know, in some cases you can't use a bin because you'll case harden your cones because they're all kind of squished together. But in other cases, you know, where you've got really strong scales, you know, maybe you can push the issue a little bit, and you know, the cones will create space for themselves, and you'll have good air circulation. I mean, there's just so many things to think about in terms of making sure that you're not creating a mold situation or a heating situation and all that. So I think it's something we're all approaching very cautiously. Okay.
Michael, maybe something with megabags and Seropna species, and maybe a little more opportunities.
Certainly, our cones that come from Alberta are generally shipped here in the big mega bags, so the bags you would see for fertilizer or peanuts. We've tried to adapt our equipment to handle those bags. In some cases, we've been successful, in some cases not so successful, but we're looking at improvements in the future. But certainly for serotinous species, the big bags do work.
Do I have to go to my list? I have to see my question. Oh. No. You know, a common thing I think we're often thinking about, you know, in your operations, how do you balance final seed lot yield and germination, and what tools do you use?
I'm gonna give that one to Don to start with.
Yeah, you didn't understand the question.
I'm still processing the question.
How do you balance? We're always talking about this balance between seed lot yield, the amount of grams you get, and the final germination capacity. What sort of techniques do you do to balance that, or do you have a higher weighting to one of those things?
Okay.
And what tools do you use
Okay.
to help inform that?
I have to admit, and you know, Nabil alluded to it earlier, we're vertically integrated. So I feel like I'm in this lucky spot where, as a government employee, where I can be a little bit more cost intensive to make sure that there's savings down the line. So we're really trying to get, you know, my goal is to get, you know, as much as we can up to 98% purity or higher. And just trying to, since we control the a lot of the collection, you know, since we're coordinating the collections as well, just trying to make sure that the germination capacity, you know, all this stuff leading to good germination capacities is adhered to all the way into the processing facility. So, you know, it's an expensive operation, and when we're making those decisions, you know, we're thinking really in terms of, you know, is there a consequence to doing just a little bit more? You know, I mean, when's the tipping point and all that? And, you know, when we're using tools like, you know, our X-ray machine, or the opportunity cost aspect of like, what other things in this moment should we be doing? You know, should our time be used more wisely doing something else in this moment? You know, and that kind of helps us get through the decision on, okay, we have to move on. This is good enough, which I hate the term good enough because it kind of brings all bad things to mind, but seriously, you do have to make those decisions. So.
Yeah, well, it's the same. We do exactly the same. Being a state, every process needs to be as efficient as we can. And we're also aiming for that high germination rate. So if it needs to be cleaned an extra time, fine, put it through.
So you sacrifice your yield just to make sure germination is, what would your objective be in Sweden? Because I have heard very high numbers.
Yeah, so in Sweden, we are lucky to just handling 2 species. So it's Norway spruce and Scots pine, and we are really good at it. So, but we handle them a lot. So they're quite similar. So yeah, we are lucky.
Are you going to give us a magic number of what your objective is? Like I've heard 98%.
Yeah, 97, 98% in germination, and also aiming at that energy as well.
Can I ask what everyone's seeds per capita?
Oh, that's a good.
That's if you have to do 1.5%, right?
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. Particularly outside Crown land, private land users, you really have to talk to your client and see what, if they're going to sow 3 seeds per cavity, do you need 98%? Not a chance. In some cases, for some of the shrub or non-commercial tree species, they're going to sow multiples per cavity. And if there's a little extra trash, if it's only 95% purity, not a problem. So, you know, I think really it's all client driven. You have to see what they want. We do all of our final cleaning by air, so we can try and balance out getting the best yield possible. For Douglas fir, for example, if we've got 93, 94, and they're going to sow, as you say, 1.5 plus times 1.1 for spillage or, you know, the factor, then That's fine. 98 isn't going to really be a problem unless you're really counting on single sowing and, one seed per cavity.
Of course. Sorry. Part of the reason we're looking at the seed sorter and one germinable seed is to go down to one per cell for our customers. And the main reason behind that is quite a lot of our work, about 40% of what we sell has some conservation aspect to it, and the seed is in short supply. And the growth in the industry at the moment is making it that the value of every seed is important. If we can go from 3 per cell to 2 per cell or to 1 per cell, all of a sudden you've got to do a third of the picking. And when labor's like it is, and when scarcity of seed is like it is, and we're experiencing 20-25% growth a year, that's really important. So part of the aim is it makes our business growth sustainable by making more efficient use of the seed lot and to recycle seed that we're stratifying. Some of our deeply dormant seeds we're stratifying for 38 weeks. And we can put them through the process again, those that haven't stratified. So that's great. And it reduces the amount of labor at the picking stage.
How much of the strategies I don't know any nursery that wants, obviously these are specialized species, but for your reforestation, how many nurseries want to do a one seed per cavity?
All our cell growers focus for it.
We certainly have that demand here, for sure.
But I think it varies from one nursery to another.
Yeah. But it's like Don says for the field growers, if it's 85%, they don't care. They just sow a bit more seed. So it's horses for courses. Yeah, I agree with Don.
But in Sweden, we don't do bare roots anymore. We only do plug. Yeah.
I think maybe that's right. I think we are out of a situation in BC where we've been at full capacity. So those things have been a bit more attractive. I also think with some of our labor challenges that it becomes quite important. A few comments from online from Steve Jones, just asking about the organic nature of burlap and compostability, but also about whether in Sweden they're still using IDS techniques for processing.
Yeah, for pine, yes, we do. Quite a lot, especially for northern seedlots in Sweden, which normally will have a lower germination rate because they don't have that long growing season. So the cones don't have so much time to mature as they would in south of Sweden. So for older seedlots and northern seedlots, we do for pine, yes.
One more question for you, Patrick. In gaining 98 to 100% germinability through seed sorting, do you fear losing genetic diversity?
No, not when we have our seed orchards and they are being open pollinated and covering all of Sweden. So no, we are not.
I'll just say
Can you say IPS or IPS?
IDS or DSG, what we used to use in BC, we call it. Incubation, dry, separate. It's just an advanced kind of final physiologically based processing.
I mean, the objective of 98% worked very well for some of these species like spruces and pines, but we have species in BC and Washington, Oregon that traditionally have 60-70% germination. And if you use the existing sowing rules, you'll be sowing 3, 4, sometimes 5 seeds per cavity. So again, if we can reduce that through having a slightly lower purity standard or not sacrificing as many seeds, having to compensate empties versus filled seeds, then so be it, because they're going to be thinned anyway, particularly yellow cypress. And I mean, the companies go outside the box with their sowing rules these days, and they're sowing way less than the sowing rules, and they figure the cost of the seed is so high they can afford to transplant, and they transplant very well.
Yeah. During our tour this afternoon, Spencer will talk about some of the things that provincially we're doing in BC for seed use efficiency. Laura, just for the people online, I'll ask you to use this, please.
Okay. Don't have to push anything.
No.
So I just
Don't hold it too
I
close.
just have a question or a, yeah, sure.
For the Zoom.
So for the licensees who put out these sowing requests and they have standards that they want these trees grown to, is there any push for them to just say, I want to maximize my seed usage and just extractable plug? Like, because we're losing there too. You know, we're doing better with our germination capacities, but they're getting the seed, they're sowing it. The grower may not do a good job, and then these trees are just being tossed. So is there any push, or will there be any push to change what they're doing?
And Laura's a former grower, so she's not pointing fingers, only from.
Well, I can speak for British Columbia a little bit. The standards have always been very high for tree seedlings in terms of what's acceptable and what's not. And it just drives me wild to go buy bins full of seedlings that may not be 15 centimeters high. They may not be 2.5 millimeters root collar diameter, and they're being tossed. But personally, I look at the roots and I look at the buds. And if they're close, that's better use of seed.
Yeah. Yeah, you know, maybe much rather see those get on the landscape and maybe increase your density of your planting, but at least they're not in that pile there. And back to Don's comment about not all species are the same. When I think about single seed sowing in BC, I think the emphasis is on, you know, spruce, lodgepole pine, which is 75% of our program in BC. And certainly we're not thinking about doing that for yellow cedar or ABs. There's just too much variability and too low values for our germination capacities. What's your
stop customers from asking?
Well, you know, on the other hand, here, it's the client's responsibility to have the seed for reforestation. So part of the onus goes back to them to have good collections. What's your biggest challenge with your cone and seed processing activities?
I think part of a huge part of it goes back to what Ian was talking about, and that's just making sure that I don't know, I still have this dream that we're going to be able to raise foresters that think about every step of forestry and think about front end, you know, like where trees come from and all that kind of stuff, to where just more people are aware of that end of the process, to where they can understand why it's important, and as a result be more engaged. Like I think a lot of our foresters in dealing with the nurseries that grow for us, they don't really know the right questions to ask. They don't go to see the crop, you know. And it all translates into just not taking an integrated approach to what we do. And you know, if you have at least a basic understanding of every step of the way, even through you know, the timber end of things, I think it really helps you understand how to balance the different decisions along the way. So anyway, just rolling that back to the cone and seed thing, if you can get the folks on the ground to actually look up and think about what's happening different times of the summer, and I think that facilitates really being engaged on making sure the best product gets to the processing facility, and then asking questions of the processing facility as follow-up to make sure that they're doing their part of the deal as well. So I guess that's all I got.
So from my aspect, and this is really about moving forward over the next few years, and I think it's going to be succession management and keeping people excited and interested in cone and seed processing and staffing. We kind of have a joke here, BC stands for brain cash, but it's a very expensive jurisdiction to live in, and right now it's really hard to get staff, especially for labor. laborer jobs. So I think that's going to be one of the biggest challenges going forward. If we go back a bit over the last 25 years, I think the biggest challenge was getting capital and getting some of our executive or the politicians excited in what we do. We might have been invisible behind the scenes. We knew we were good at our jobs, but that has now come to the forefront, certainly here in BC, and we seem to have good support, and there seems to be good support to spend some money, but it's, can we get the staff and can we get the engineers to design the products that we need and build the equipment that we need? One little example is we were looking at some new equipment it had 2 years ago, and it had to come out of Texas. Well, the ice storm in Texas shut our equipment manufacturer down, and we had to do a little bit of creative accounting to be able to get that machine delivered in the next fiscal year. So those are just some of the challenges. So getting equipment in a timely manner, getting staff in a timely manner. The product is biologically sensitive, and sometimes those time windows you're dealing with are very limited.
Yeah, and I think, you know, in terms of executive and making us aware, it's a continual process, and there's a lot of turnover, but it's quite important. Some of you are on the fisheries tour on the weekend, and, you know, it's good to have this sort of grassroots movement up, and sort of their hesitation to want to have the politicians on site or that sort of level. But boys, that water flows down a lot faster and things get done if you really get into that level versus having a totally grassroots. So you got to get up to the top, and things can filter down quite quickly if you get them convinced of the importance of your practices.
Yeah.
Just give everyone a chance to comment, and then I'll pass to you, Nabil.
Well, for Sweden, it's going to be the climate. Already now for the collection, we are not allowed to collect from ladders. It's only 2 steps. So we are mainly forced to use sky lifts, and they can ruin a lot during autumn and winter if it's not going to be frozen in the soil. So we have that issue, and it's going to be a real problem for us. And also in the spring, we see more frosts, and that could also damage our crop. So that will be a challenge for us, at least.
Yeah, I think I'm going to basically repeat what Michael said. Getting people interested in working in the field has got more and more challenging to find people that aren't, you know, like this, that they don't want to get their hands dirty. Secondly, the other thing is we need better communications both ways. You know, get the people that are doing the processing out into the field and see what's actually happening at the time of collection and after the product is cleaned and grown and shipped to the field, and vice versa. Have those people come and see what you're doing in the processing department. So.
Yeah, I would say the biggest challenge from the nursery perspective is that, you know, seedlings are having a moment, reforestation's having a moment. There's a lot of political attention being given to seed as well. But Dave talked about the disconnect between academia and some of the real world problems we have. And what we're seeing in Oregon, Washington is a decrease and an elimination of the extension type jobs that have been really helpful to help solve these real world problems. And reforestation industry, they aren't what apples are in Washington state or potatoes are. They have their own commissions, and they're able to fund these extension positions out. And together we're looking into combining with other specialty crop industries so that together that we can make one apple commission or potato commission, therefore get these extension university positions filled, because there is this wave of retirement in university as well.
I'm just, you know, we talked about ladders and issues, and Tia, you know, what's the situation in BC now? Are we still on 14-foot ladders, or is everything, what's our safety sort of limits or limitations that we use in orchards for collections?
crown management is big so that they don't get so big that you need to use, but we use 12 foots pretty regularly, not very often 14. But in our bigger ones, lifts, I think, you know, we saw Mosaic, they're predominantly lift because they have no choice really. Their trees are bad, but in general, you'll see in the interior, the trees are much shorter.
Helen.
Questions, that's all right.
Of course, yes.
So I've got a new question to ask, just moving on a bit. In the UK, because the amount of tree planting is meant to be going up drastically, the government are doing a lot of funding to encourage new growers into the market. But new growers have got nowhere to learn how to grow, so they turn to us for information and advice. If the seed we send them isn't used effectively, it's wasting our seed that we're sending them. And I just wondered, are you having the same issue? And if you do get new growers and new nurseries on the market, where do they go for advice on how to sow efficiently?
It's funny, this morning I was kind of reflecting on something like that, because we're talking about needing to grow the number of people coming in to help satisfy what is really a great need. And the problem with that, of course, is then the quality control, right? I mean, it's just going to be all over the place. And then, yeah, how do you ensure that people coming in that might have the interest and motivation, how they get the right information to start off on the right foot and don't, on one hand, get discouraged, or on the other hand, waste a whole bunch of a very valuable product. And I think it does come back kind of like what Nabil was saying. I mean, we have to have those extension people that are available out there to get, to get them the right publications to read, or to get them, hands-on experience of good practices. And there's still going to be bumps along the way, but at least they've made those connections, or starting to make those connections of the people to talk to get the right answers. But in the others, I don't think there's any easy way to do that. It's going to be bumpy.
There are a few comments about BC. A few years ago, we reached 308 million. We're down around 295 now. Is that? 299. 299 this year. We had planned with that 308 year to maybe even be up at 320. We never reached that. The long-term plan, because of mountain pine beetle and reforestation, is planting will be going down perhaps to the 250 level. In terms of, so we might have more capacity, and there was a time in the past where nurseries basically went out of business because there wasn't enough business to move around. And Natasha, I'll give you that, please.
How is capacity projections being impacted by trees planted for climate change mitigation as opposed to for reforestation post-harvest?
Can you repeat your question?
Absolutely. How is capacity projections being influenced by need for trees to be planted for purely carbon sequestration, for carbon offsets, all these large programs, as opposed to solely for reforestation post-harvest?
Not much is my answer. Brian, can you comment on that maybe? No. You don't want to touch that one.
I was thinking a similar question is, there's the nursery capacity.
I'll just expand on your, okay. He wants me to show off my retro shirt here. Yeah, look at this. Okay. So I'll just
try away from the spotlight.
Okay, no, but I don't have, I'm on the inside, I don't have the numbers anymore. But I did want to supplement your question. It's not just the nursery capacity, but, and maybe you've got some data, but does Canada have the seed required to plant the 2 billion trees?
Exactly. I'm not sure we have the land, and if we're planting it, at the Arctic Circle, does it really make a difference if we get 2 billion trees out there or not in terms of carbon sequestration?
I was gonna add, I could add two things if it helps. One was back to the question of, I'm gonna sit there so people online can see me. So the question of I think the nursery associations about knowledge transfer. I mean, I think what we got out of the last national survey, I'm still trying to summarize, is that, you know, about 25 to 40% of the groups that are new growers trying to get into the sector, they really are hoping that the nursery sector, even if it's ornamental, will start offering more support for native producers. You know, it's kind of seen as a subcategory of plants, and it doesn't really bother Stats Canada for nursery crop production, whether it's native or not native. And to the point of the 2 billion seeds program, I mean, outside of reforestation, almost nobody in the country has excess seed in the bank. Like, most people have less than 3 years worth of production. A lot of them are operating on just-in-time buying. So I think that points to the fact that outside of committed reforestation, it is pretty limited.
I think one thing that Don said earlier is that one of the issues around all this and the skill sets that we're not getting, the people who are going out there doing the training, offering the extension work, they're not people who've got their hands dirty in the past. And people who've got their hands dirty are the ones who should be doing the teaching, not some highfalutin academic, I'm afraid.
Peggy?
I can just comment on that because we took over our nursery 3.5 years ago, and none of us had any experience in growing trees, or very little. We have partners that do, but the ones on site didn't. And we just relied on contracting growers from other nurseries to help us, because we needed the hands-on experience. We could read all the books, but it doesn't do any good. You need to have somebody who has the same climate and the same type of facility to help you grow a good crop.
Back to Helen's comment, maybe on the growing end, is, you know, in BC, and none of them are online here. So, you know, 50% of our seedlings roughly are produced by one conglomerate of nurseries, and, you know, they're not in the business of sharing. So there is a lot of proprietary information. It doesn't get passed down to the sort of mom and pop organizations of someone just starting up. I think our nursery association is really trying to revitalize that and become more of a technical exchange organization rather than a lobbying or just get together and drink with Spencer sort of activity.
I might add one more thing. It's a good point. We were talking about this at lunch yesterday. It was just, you know, I think the other trick of it too is that there's not a lot of programs left in Canada that train in propagation. And when you don't have new growers coming to the system, there's not even an excess of growers. And the growers are the busiest people I know. And in Canada, when I was looking at some Stats Can stuff about the reduction in labor and consolidation of nurseries, I mean, we've lost 25% of our nurseries and 30% of our labor pool since 2007. So the Great Recession is still around, on top of retirements, on top of a number of other really big factors. And just growers are insanely busy, and having to teach each other is just one extra thing on their plate. So.
So this is a comment really rather than a question. Our government, as well as funding new starters into the nursery business, they're also not happy that we're the main seed supplier in the UK. So they're also funding new people to start up in the seed business, but then we're really the only ones with the knowledge. So then they're asking us to pass our knowledge onto new seed suppliers. And it's quite hard to sort of say, well, yes, we can see it's good for the industry to have competitors for us, but why should we train them to do the work? So we're just a bit awkward situations at the moment.
Yeah, and I'm sort of familiar with what gets put into some of our silviculture classes in British Columbia and who does it. And, you know, they don't have a clue. And, you know, trying to help on that end, I'm not as dirty as Dawn in terms of field experience, but a little closer to tree improvement and certainly our facility that, you know, hopefully we're making efforts to, you know, try to get some practical, basic, useful information, because, you know, most of the professors are looking back to the 1970 handbooks and copying that page and putting on the slides. And it's unbelievable what, you know, has been in just the lectures. They're just not interested. And it's, you know, a point I've made throughout. It's not part of their research grant area. It's not what they think about. And, you know, how do we get that back into the system? That's sort of,
Steve's got a good comment here and he wants to ask Sheila to comment on it afterwards. Steve Jones online says applied research is the missing part linked to the tree seed nurseries. The UK Forestry Commission model worked, but it's not supported now. Sheila can comment on what's happened lately. Sorry. It wasn't a question, it was a comment on.
your job in Alice Holt. And their involvement. Just for people awareness.
Well, I don't know where to start because I was the last tree seed scientist at Forest Research in Britain, and they closed the lab. So there is no succession planning and there's no one else to carry on the work.
That's the message to give people, you know, it's kind of like the Angus closure. That's our experience. You know, it's kind of unbelievable. Nabil?
From the nursery industry, we understand we're a small player, forest nursery industries. So we're looking at the larger industries that do have applied professors. In our case, you know, North Carolina State, University of Florida, there's actually some very good online training programs that give a basis because we feel we can teach all the specifics of our, you know, our individual species and their problems and their successes. But oftentimes the people who come to us don't have the fundamental understanding of nutrient management, weed management, things like that. And so the University of Florida in the last couple of years has an award-winning program. Yes, it is more catered towards the floriculture, but a lot of the fundamental concepts, you know, salt, you know, ECs and aeration porosity, bulk density, things like that, to get new growers thinking about that. We feel like that's a very cost-effective program. So there's one on nutrient efficiency, there's one on weeds, there's a second one on nutrient management. We're going to have to look to bigger nurseries and then just bigger industries and then just build on that. And the way, and quite frankly, the way that people learn now is largely online and through videos. And that's how they've been learned in university through the pandemic. And that's the mode in which students learn.
You haven't spoken yet, so.
Oh, it's my first time speaking and it's going to be an interesting farther right here. I was actually going to say, kind of interestingly, the cannabis industry being in Washington, I'm finding that more and more of our job applicants, that is their greenhouse experience. You know, obviously legalization made it a sexy new field to go into, but the great thing about that is a lot of the new growers that we have, you know, that's what attracted them, but really they care about plants. It's not that, you know, they care about cannabis. And so we're seeing a lot of people migrating out of the cannabis industry now into other greenhouse types of jobs. And so I think that this is an opportunity for people working in forestry to reach out to people that do have an interest in working with plants.
Melissa, I don't know if you can online.
I think the British are becoming well known for as a population for doing self-harm to themselves. You know, Brexit, shutting down Sheila's lab. But the other thing we did, and this is just to supplement what Sheila was saying, we have an organization called the Agricultural and Horticultural Development Board. And as a good piece of self-harm by the nursery and seed trade, our trade association voted no longer to have a levy for research and not to work alongside other sectors, even though we're in a period of growth. And that was the height of selfishness and idiocy. And I cannot understand why our own industry did it. So sometimes we've only ourselves to blame because we're offered these opportunities by government and we refuse it. But maybe that's a British thing.
I'll offer it to the panel too. Is there something online? I'll just offer it to the panel if there's anything that maybe we haven't covered that you'd like to say.
Well, I detected there was a lot of doom and gloom there, and then a few rays of hope over there. So I was just thinking about, you know, Dave has done a good job of kind of framing all the issues, and it's kind of overwhelming. But when you think about it, I mean, you have to kind of get back to what can I do, right? And one thing is, I think about, like, say you go to a party or something like that, and you meet people. You've done this. In fact, I might get you to say some examples, but no, you talk to people about, it's just the social interchange thing, and oh, what do you do? And then you start talking about what you do, and you slowly watch their eyes roll back into their head, right? And you're kind of making sure that you don't like put a damper on the conversation, so you change the subject or whatever. But I just think about how can we reframe those interactions where we make sure we get the message across. We have that opportunity to get the message across about the importance of what we do, and just don't try to stay in a situation where what we do is so different than what so many people do, and to find a way to make it interesting in just a few words where they get the importance of it, and maybe talk to their kids too. So that kind of stuff. So anyway, just throwing that out there for something we can do when we leave here today, kind of thing. So.
That was a really good summary, Jeff.
Thanks.
Actually, that's one of the purposes of a meeting like this, right? Is to talk about it and figure out what can we do better. But Dave will remember the day nursery extension services was shut down here in BC. And I mean, things happen, government cycle, decisions are made. And sometimes we have to be creative behind the scenes to keep the interest going and then to actually keep the program going.
Yeah, it's a lot of pressure on managers to
Be
overcome
creative.
that. Yeah.
And I was really just lucky to be at a fully operational facility that, I didn't get at this. The others were solely just at an extension role. So all my colleagues suddenly were no longer in the system.
Well, for us, being a part of the ISF, we don't have Dean Swift with us today, but hopefully we will go and visit him in 2 years, because he is operating in New Mexico and Colorado, and the things he sees there right now might happen at us at some point. So exchanging experience right now, thinking of the future, that's really good. And then also, I know it's a load, maybe organizing these things, but they are so useful and so interesting.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we probably need to do is make sure that some component of seed discussion gets on the Forest Nursery Association meetings every year, for sure. Spencer. The other thing is, it's more of a question to Kia, because I believe you were involved in organizing a group of people related to seed in the Pacific Northwest. Would you like to?
So when DroneSeed acquired Sylvie, this very topic that we're all talking about for this conference, challenges to seed supply, this is foremost on their mind. And so this year, DroneSeed hosted a conference in California. They called it the Tree Seed Summit. It brought together stakeholders in terms of private collectors, climbing crews, people that actually go out and do seed. Also some of the seed banking entities, mostly in California, because this was our inaugural run. And to talk about, what are the challenges in the pipeline and, what we can all do going forward. And we're hoping that we will make this an annual event. So yes, next year, hopefully we'll have it in a different location. And obviously everybody that's here at this conference would be a stakeholder in this group that we're also talking about doing. And so yes, I hope that there will be more opportunities to talk with the broader stakeholder group at these summits that we're going to continue to work on.
So I think one of the things that BC Tree Seed Center has been quite successful at is seed conservation, and Spencer's a big part of that in inventory management, encouraging the nurseries to reduce their grams and to really think about those individual orders and how many trees they need to grow out of those, and just make sure that the grams truly matches their needs. Another thing we've done with Dave and with Spencer is continuous improvement, looking, and thanks to Dan at Vernon Seed Orchard, we were challenged on a germination result for spruce a couple of years ago, and we changed the stratification and the test regime we use for spruce. That was quite successful, and that's an ongoing methodology. We also take return seed back from the nurseries, and that's not one of Spencer's favorite things. But yeah, we're looking at seed conservation and making sure that that seed is not wasted.
So let's Steve Jones would like to unmute. Since everyone wants to say something.
Sure.
Steve up on the.
Can you hear me okay, Melissa?
Trying to get you to go through the speakers. Just go ahead. Say what
Go
you.
as loud as you can, Steve.
Very loud.
So hey guys, the comment I made earlier for Sheila, what was the fact that
I'll repeat it.
you okay or not, or keep going?
Go ahead.
Okay, so that earlier comment I made about myself and Sheila was that when I left the Forestry Commission and went to agriculture at NIAB, she then carried on, but now Forestry Commission made the decision not to replace her as a scientist there, and that work was applied science. So, you know, we worked closely with Forest Start and Andy Gordon and others in those days to progress and share knowledge. And I think the US do a great system on that with their extension people, but that doesn't exist in the UK. It doesn't exist in parts of Canada. Petawawa was shut, you know, other places in Canada was shut. If we can maybe capture YouTube videos, get together with ISF, maybe ISTA, Tree Shreed, Shrub Committee, Dave with Elise and others to capture some more of the videos like you've done, that could be a project to help people going forward.
So I know many of us couldn't hear that. I think Steve is really encouraging, you know, thinking about different forms of communication. I know even with our Canadian Forest Genetics Association, we've been talking about webinars, getting this dedicated information out that, you know, may never make it out into our curriculums at our colleges or universities. So what other forms, and especially with, you know, all the online stuff, how can we get this information out there and help disseminate practical operational information? I think I'm going to close the panel. We're going to have a video presentation, but I'll give you a few minutes just to stretch your limbs. But please, unless you have to go to the washroom, don't venture very far. We're going to have Richard Hamlin on for a video. So let's have a hand for all of our panel here. It was better than I expected, so thank you. I thought that was really good.
Yeah.